It was an ordinary morning in the small town, the kind where everyone knew everyone else's business. The sun had just started to rise and the streets were still quiet except for the sound of brooms sweeping and birds chirping on the wires. Inside the town's community center, a gentle woman moved from one room to another, carrying a bucket and a mop. Her steps were soft, almost as if she didn't want to disturb the silence. She always came early before anyone else arrived, to make sure the floors were clean and the place looked perfect for the day. She wasn't the kind of person anyone paid much attention to. Most people only knew her as the quiet cleaner who never complained and always kept to herself. She wore simple clothes, never fancy, and tied her hair in a neat bun. Her face showed kindness, but her eyes carried a sadness that no one seemed to notice. She had been working at that center for years, but no one really knew much about her. Every day she wiped tables, emptied trash cans, and smiled politely when someone spoke to her. She never interrupted, never raised her voice. And maybe that's why people thought she had nothing special about her. In their eyes, she was just another background figure, someone easy to overlook. But behind that quietness, she carried a story, one that no one had ever asked to hear. Around mid-morning, a group of women entered the center for their weekly tea gathering. They were well-dressed, laughing loudly, their perfume filling the room. They saw the cleaner mopping the hallway and exchanged amused glances. One of them whispered something and they all giggled. It wasn't the first time they did that. They often made jokes about her simple clothes and quiet ways. "Morning," one of them said in a tone that sounded more like teasing than greeting. "Good morning," the woman replied softly, without looking up. They watched her for a moment, whispering among themselves, and then walked away, still laughing. She heard them but said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was the best answer to cruelty. Later that week, the center's manager announced a charity event, a talent night to raise money for local children. The idea was simple. Anyone could perform and the audience would donate. Excitement spread quickly through the town. People began talking about what they would do: singing, dancing, comedy, and even magic tricks. The group of women from the tea gatherings decided to take part, not to perform, but to organize and attend in their elegant dresses. As they were discussing it one afternoon, they noticed the cleaner wiping tables nearby. One of them, smirking, said loud enough for her to hear, "Maybe she should perform too. I bet she's got some secret talent." The others laughed. "Yes," another added. "Maybe she can play the piano." "Imagine that!" Their laughter echoed through the hall. The cleaner smiled politely but didn't respond. She kept cleaning, pretending not to care. But inside, her heart ached a little. They didn't know that once upon a time the piano had been her world. Years ago, when she was young, her mother used to sit beside her on an old wooden bench, teaching her how to place her fingers on the keys. The sound of music filled their small home, and her mother would say, "Don't just play notes, play feelings." She had loved every moment of it. But life had changed quickly. After losing her parents, she was forced to leave her dreams behind. Bills and survival came first, and music was left as a distant memory. That night, she went home to her small apartment and sat by the window, staring at the moon. She thought about the laughter at the center, and about how people judged her just because she stayed quiet. She opened a small box from her drawer. Inside it was an old charm bracelet, the only thing left from her mother. Holding it in her hand, she smiled faintly. "Maybe one day," she whispered. The next morning, when she came to work, she saw something strange on the event board. Someone had written her name on the list of performers for the charity night. Piano performance, Lena. It was clearly written in large letters. She froze for a moment. She hadn't signed up. Then she heard laughter from behind. The same group of women stood nearby, pretending to look innocent. "Oh, look. You're performing," one of them said, smiling. "We can't wait to see it." Her heart pounded. She didn't know what to say. They were mocking her, clearly expecting her to back out. But part of her didn't want to give them the satisfaction. I'll think about it," she said quietly. The women laughed again. "Oh, please do. It will be fun." All day she couldn't focus. Her hands trembled as she cleaned. She hadn't touched a piano in years. What if she had forgotten everything? But what if she said no? They would laugh even more, call her a coward, and the teasing would never stop. That night, she went home and stared at the same charm bracelet again. Finally, she took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Maybe it's time." The following week, the community center was buzzing with excitement. Posters for the event were everywhere. Her name was still on the list and people began talking. "The cleaner is performing," some said. "Oh, that's going to be something." Others joked that it would be the highlight of the night, but not for a good reason. One evening, while she was mopping the main hall, an older man who worked as a janitor noticed her worried face. He had seen how people treated her and it bothered him. "You don't have to do it if you don't want to," he said kindly. She looked up at him, unsure what to say. "I don't want to, but I think I have to," he nodded. Sometimes the only way to silence laughter is to surprise it. His words stayed with her. The days passed quickly. Each time she walked past the piano in the corner of the hall, she felt her heart beat faster. It was an old piano, slightly out of tune, but it reminded her of home. One afternoon, when the hall was empty, she sat down in front of it. Her hands hesitated above the keys. Slowly, she pressed one note, then another. The sound echoed softly. Her eyes filled with tears. She had missed this feeling more than she could ever admit. She started playing quietly, just for herself. Her fingers were stiff at first, but then they began to move as if remembering an old friend. The melody was simple but full of emotion. When she finished, she wiped her eyes quickly, afraid someone might see. But the janitor, standing near the doorway, had heard everything. He didn't say a word, just smiled and nodded as if to say, "You still have it." That night she practiced again at home on a small keyboard she had found years ago at a thrift shop. It was dusty and missing a few keys, but she didn't care. She practiced after work every night with quiet determination. She didn't tell anyone, not even the kind janitor. When the day of the event finally arrived, the town hall was decorated with lights and flowers. The air buzzed with excitement. Families gathered, children laughed, and performers rehearsed nervously backstage. She stood in the corner, clutching her charm bracelet tightly, her heart pounding so hard it almost hurt. The women who mocked her earlier were sitting in the front row, dressed in fancy clothes, smiling as if they couldn't wait for the show to begin. One of them noticed her and whispered to her friend, both laughing quietly. She wanted to run, to disappear before anyone noticed her. But then she remembered her mother's voice. "Play feelings, not notes." She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and waited for her turn. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Next up, we have Lena performing a piano piece for us tonight." Laughter and whispers rippled through the audience. Some even clapped sarcastically. She walked slowly toward the piano, her steps small and careful. Her hands trembled, and her chest felt tight. She could feel everyone's eyes on her. When she reached the piano, she sat down without saying a word. The room grew a little quieter. She placed her hands on the keys, her charm bracelet glinting under the stage light. For a second, she couldn't move. Then she took another breath and pressed the first note. A soft sound filled the hall, fragile, trembling but beautiful. She pressed another, then another. The laughter faded. The sound grew stronger. Each note carried something real, her memories, her pain, her hope. The piano spoke the words she never said. As the melody began to form, the crowd started to lean forward, realizing this was no joke. And in that moment, something inside her changed. The hall was silent except for the sound of her fingers moving across the piano keys. At first her hands trembled and the notes came out uneven, but as the melody grew, so did her confidence. The crowd, which had started the night full of laughter and whispers, now sat completely still. It was as if the whole room was holding its breath. The light above her glowed softly, reflecting off her charm bracelet as her fingers began to dance faster. Her body leaned slightly forward, lost in the rhythm. Each note she played seemed to tell a story of pain, loss, love, and strength. The people who had come expecting to laugh now couldn't take their eyes off her. Even the ones who had mocked her before looked frozen, unsure how to react. Her face was calm but full of emotion. She wasn't showing off. She was simply letting her heart speak through the piano. Some people in the audience started to feel a strange heaviness in their chest, as if the music was reaching deep inside them. An elderly woman in the front row wiped away a tear. A young boy sitting beside his mother leaned forward, whispering, "She's really good." His mother nodded slowly, too moved to speak. The notes grew stronger, more powerful, filling the hall completely. The sound echoed against the walls, soft but commanding. The music was not from a sheet or a plan, and it was pure feeling. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it softened again. Her hand slowed, and the last few notes faded like whispers in the wind. When the final sound disappeared, there was a moment of absolute silence. Not a single cough, not a whisper, just stillness. Then the crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't polite clapping or forced cheering, it was real. Loud, heartfelt, thunderous applause that filled the hall. People stood to their feet, clapping and shouting. Even those who had made fun of her before joined in, unable to hide their shock. She sat there quietly, looking surprised. Her eyes were shining, and a small smile appeared on her face. She stood up slowly and bowed her head, not saying a word. For the first time in years, she felt proud. Not for attention, not for praise, but because she had finally shared something that was hers. As she walked backstage, the event host followed her quickly. "That was unbelievable," he said, still clapping. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She smiled softly and replied, "My mother taught me a long time ago." The host nodded, touched by her simple answer. When she stepped into the quiet hallway behind the stage, she felt her legs trembling. She leaned against the wall, her heart still racing. It all felt unreal. The crowd, the clapping, the look on people's faces. She hadn't planned to impress anyone. She had only wanted to stop the laughter. But instead, she had given them something to feel. A moment later, the janitor who had encouraged her came walking toward her with a wide smile. "I knew it," he said proudly. "I told you, sometimes silence is the loudest voice." She laughed softly, tears in her eyes. "I didn't think they would listen." "They didn't just listen," he said. "You made them feel." Back in the hall, people were still talking about her performance. Some were replaying videos they had recorded on their phones. A few had even posted them online. Comments began to appear within minutes. "Who is she?" Someone wrote, "This woman just played from the soul." Another wrote, "She was mocked, but look at her now." The women who had made fun of her sat silently in their seats, avoiding each other's eyes. The laughter they had once shared now felt like a heavy weight. They hadn't expected her to shine at her, and now they felt embarrassed. One of them tried to clap again, pretending to be supportive, but even that felt forced. After the event ended, people gathered around her backstage. They congratulated her, shook her hand, and praised her talent. Some even apologized for not knowing she could play like that. She accepted every word with calm grace, thanking them politely. When she finally left the hall that night, the streets were quiet. The moon was high above, just like the night she had made her decision to perform. She walked home slowly, still hearing the echoes of applause in her mind. When she reached her small apartment, she placed her charm bracelet on the table and sat by the window. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, but from relief. The next morning, when she arrived at work, people treated her differently. Some smiled genuinely. Others whispered and looked at her with admiration instead of mockery. The manager of the community center came up to her and said, "You were amazing last night. Everyone's talking about you. We're proud to have you here." She thanked him, trying to hide her surprise. Throughout the day, people kept stopping by to see her, some even asking if she could teach their children. She wasn't sure how to respond. She was just a cleaner, or at least that's what she had always believed. But now people saw her differently. Later that afternoon, one of the women from the tea group approached her. She looked nervous and awkward. I wanted to say sorry," she said quietly. "We shouldn't have made fun of you." "We didn't know." The woman looked down, unable to meet her eyes. The cleaner smiled gently and said, "It's all right. You couldn't have known." The woman nodded quickly, mumbling another apology before walking away. That night, the video of her performance had spread even more online. Dozens of comments poured in. People from other towns, even other countries, were touched by her story. Many wrote about how her music reminded them of their own struggles or lost dreams. At first, she didn't pay much attention. She wasn't used to praise or attention. But when a local newspaper contacted the community center asking to interview her, she hesitated. The manager encouraged her, saying it could inspire others. The next day, she sat nervously in front of a small recorder as a reporter asked questions. "When did you learn to play? Why did you stop? What did you feel when you were performing?" She answered honestly, "I started playing when I was a little girl. My mother taught me. She always said music could heal pain. But when life became difficult, I had to stop. Last night was the first time I played for others in many years. I was scared, but I just wanted to do it for her. When the article came out, people were moved. The title read, "A Quiet Cleaner Who Touched Hearts Through Music." The story spread quickly. People who had passed her in the street for years without noticing her now stopped to greet her. Children waved when she walked by. Despite all the attention, she remained the same, modest, polite, and kind. She still cleaned the floors each morning, still smiled when greeting others. But something inside her had changed. She no longer felt invisible. She had finally found her voice again. One evening, the janitor found her sitting by the piano after everyone had left. She was playing softly to herself, eyes closed, lost in the sound. "You're going to have to get used to people asking you to play now," he said with a grin. She laughed gently. "Maybe, but I'll never stop cleaning." "This place is my second home," he smiled. "Then let the music live here too." As she continued to play, the soft melody filled the empty hall, just as it had on that unforgettable night. The janitor sat quietly in the corner, listening. He knew what everyone else now understood, that behind quiet people often live the strongest souls. And though she didn't say it aloud, she felt her mother's presence beside her, as if whispering the same old words, play feelings, not notes. That night she went home feeling light. She opened her window and looked up at the sky. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel small or ordinary. She didn't feel mocked or overlooked. She felt alive. The same hands that once scrubbed floors had created something beautiful. The same quiet woman people had laughed at had given them something they would never forget. In her heart, she knew that the music had not just changed how others saw her. It had changed how she saw herself. And this was only the beginning. The next few weeks passed like a dream. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. The woman who had once walked through the streets unnoticed was now greeted with smiles and kind words. Strangers thanked her for her music. Some even said her story gave them courage to start over in their own lives. At first, it all felt strange to her. She wasn't used to attention. For so long, she had lived quietly, never expecting anyone to care about what she could do. Now people wanted to take pictures with her, ask her questions, and hear her play again. It was overwhelming, but it also warmed her heart. Every morning, she still came to the community center early, carrying her mop and bucket like she always did. The difference was that now, when she walked in, people smiled instead of looking past her. The women who used to tease her sometimes tried to start small conversations. They asked about music, about her childhood, pretending as if they had always admired her. She knew what they were doing, but she didn't hold any anger. She just smiled and kept being polite. The center manager called her into his office one morning. He was a kind man, and there was a gentle excitement in his voice. "You know," he said, "after your performance, a lot of people have been asking if we could start music lessons here, especially piano, and they're asking if you'd be willing to teach." She was surprised. "Teach?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said. "You've got a gift and you have a story that inspires people. It could help the children here. We can pay you, of course, and you can do it part-time if you want." She sat there quietly for a few moments. The thought of teaching scared her a little. It had been years since she had guided anyone in music. But the idea also touched her deeply. It reminded her of her mother, who used to sit beside her and teach with patience and love. Finally, she nodded. "I'll try." That afternoon, a small group of children gathered around the old piano in the hall. Some were shy, others full of energy. She smiled at them gently and began teaching the basics: how to place their fingers, how to listen to the sound, how to feel the rhythm. She spoke softly but with warmth. The children liked her instantly. They said she made learning fun and easy. Within a few weeks, her small class grew bigger. Parents came to watch, and soon the piano that once sat unused became the heart of the community center. Laughter and music filled the halls every afternoon. She didn't earn much, but she felt richer than she ever had before. One evening, as she was locking up after class, the janitor walked in carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed her one and said, "You've changed this place. Everyone's happier now," she smiled. "It's not me. It's the music," he shook his head. "It's you. Music doesn't play itself. You gave it life again." She looked down, touched by his words. A few days later, she received a letter in the mail. It was from a nearby city. A local music organization had seen her performance video online and wanted to invite her to play at a charity concert. They said her story had inspired many, and they would be honored if she could perform for them. She read the letter twice, unsure if it was real. It had been so long since anyone had invited her to perform in a real concert hall. Part of her felt excited, but another part was afraid. What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if people in the city didn't react the same way? That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by her window looking out at the quiet town. She thought about her mother again. What would you do? She whispered to the sky. In her heart, she already knew the answer. Her mother would tell her to go, to share the music, not to hide. The next morning, she told the manager about the invitation. His face lit up. You have to go, he said. This is your moment. Don't be afraid. We'll all be cheering for you. When she told the children in her piano class, they were thrilled. You're going to play in a real concert? One of them asked, eyes wide with excitement. She smiled and nodded. Yes, but only if I can come back and tell you all about it. The children cheered, promising to practice extra hard while she was gone. The day of the concert arrived quickly. She wore a simple dress, nothing fancy but clean and neat. She didn't try to look like someone she wasn't. She wanted to stay true to herself. As she stepped into the grand concert hall, she felt small for a moment. The stage was big, the lights bright, and the audience much larger than anything she had seen before. She took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was there. She wasn't performing to impress. She was performing to share something real, the same way she had that night in her small town. When her name was announced, she walked to the piano slowly, her charm bracelet glinting in the light. The crowd grew quiet. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The first notes flowed like a gentle river. The sound filled the hall with warmth. People closed their eyes, listening closely. It was the same mixture of emotion and honesty that had touched the hearts of everyone in her town. The music carried her story, the years of struggle, the silence, the rediscovered courage. By the time she finished, the audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the hall. She stood up, smiling shyly, and bowed her head. The sound of clapping went on and on. Some people even shouted her name, thanking her for reminding them that beauty can come from anywhere. After the show, the event organizer came backstage shaking her hand. You played beautifully, he said. You didn't just perform, you connected. That's something rare. She thanked him quietly and looked around at the crowd of musicians and guests. She felt out of place among them. People in suits, elegant dresses, confident voices. But instead of feeling small, she felt calm. She didn't need to be like them. She was proud of who she was. When she returned home, the town welcomed her like a hero. The children from her class made a big sign that said, "Welcome home, our piano teacher." They ran up to her, asking what the city was like and how it felt to play in such a big hall. She laughed and told them everything, describing the lights, the stage, and the kindness of the audience. That evening, she sat at the same piano in the community hall, surrounded by her students. This is where I belong, she said softly. This is where the music feels most alive. The children nodded eagerly. Can we play too? One asked. She smiled and guided them, helping their small fingers find the right keys. The hall once again filled with laughter and sound. Later that night, after everyone had gone, she sat alone at the piano. She played quietly, just for herself. The lights were dim and the air was still. She thought about how far she had come, from being mocked to being applauded, from silence to song. She didn't see herself as famous or special. She was still the same woman who swept floors and wiped tables. But she had learned something important, that the worth of a person is never decided by others' laughter. It's something that comes from within. The old janitor came in as she finished playing. You've been busy changing the world again? He joked softly. She laughed. Just trying to keep it clean in more ways than one. He smiled and nodded. You've done more than that. You've made people remember kindness. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the piano and said quietly, maybe that's what music is supposed to do. The janitor turned off the lights as they left. The piano sat in the middle of the empty hall, still shining faintly under the moonlight that came through the window. The sound of her last note seemed to linger in the air, like a soft promise, that even the quietest voices can be heard when they speak from the heart. As she walked home that night, The cool breeze brushed her face. The streets were empty, but she didn't feel alone. She knew now that her mother's lessons would live on, not just in her, but in every child she taught, in every heart she touched. And though her journey had started with laughter meant to hurt her, it had ended with a different kind of laughter. The pure, joyful kind that only comes when people finally see the truth. Days passed peacefully after her return from the concert. The excitement around her had softened into quiet admiration. People no longer saw her as just the woman who cleaned floors or even the one who shocked everyone with her piano. Now they saw her as part of their town's soul, a reminder of how kindness, humility, and courage could change everything. Every morning, she still walked the same path to the community center, carrying her small bag and that old charm bracelet on her wrist. She still greeted everyone with the same warm smile. The difference now was how people responded. Shopkeepers waved, children called her name, and older folks stopped to chat with her. The woman who once moved unseen now brought light wherever she went. At the community center, her piano classes were full. The sound of children's laughter and music filled the hall each afternoon. Some played well, others struggled, but she never lost patience. She always told them, "The piano doesn't care about perfection. It only cares that you play with heart." The children loved her lessons. They said her voice was soft but carried something special, a calmness that made even mistakes feel beautiful. Parents often stood outside, listening through the door. For many of them, hearing their children play even a few notes brought tears to their eyes. One day, a man from the local radio station came to meet her. He said they wanted to do a short program about inspiring people in the community. "You've changed so many lives," he said. "We'd love to record your story." She hesitated at first, not used to interviews or attention. "I'm not sure people want to hear about me again," she said. "They do," he insisted kindly. "It's not just about your music. It's about hope." A week later, the interview aired on the radio. It was a simple conversation. She talked about how music had helped her through loneliness, how she wanted children to believe in their worth, and how kindness had carried her through the hardest days. Listeners called the station to say how much her words touched them. Some said they cried while listening. Others said they were reminded to follow old dreams they had buried long ago. At the community center, more parents began bringing their children for lessons. The place was livelier than ever. The manager often stood in the hallway, smiling as he listened to the sounds of pianos echoing through the rooms. "You've given this place new life," he told her one afternoon. But even with all the love and praise, she stayed humble. She still cleaned after the classes, picked up papers, wiped the piano keys gently, and made sure the hall was spotless. When people told her she didn't need to do that anymore, she just smiled and said, "I like taking care of the place that gave me a second chance." Still, not everyone was comfortable with her growing popularity. A few people in town, including one of the women who had mocked her before, began whispering again. This time, their words were different. Not jokes, but envy. "She's lucky," one said. "People treat her like a star now." Another added, "She's just pretending to be humble so everyone will love her." She heard some of these whispers, and though they hurt a little, she chose to stay quiet. She knew that bitterness often came from hearts that hadn't healed yet. Instead of answering, she kept doing what she always did, working, teaching, and spreading kindness. One rainy afternoon, she was in the hall alone, playing softly on the piano while waiting for her students. A little girl walked in, dripping wet from the rain, clutching a small notebook. "I wrote a song," the girl said shyly, "but I don't know how to play it." She smiled and gestured for the girl to sit beside her. They went through the notes together, line by line, until the little song began to take shape. It was simple and sweet, the kind of melody that made you smile without even realizing it. When they finished, the girl looked up at her and whispered, "You make music feel like magic." Those words stayed in her heart for days. She thought about how her mother had once told her the same thing when she was young. As weeks went by, more children began writing their own little songs. Some wanted to perform them at school events, and she helped each one prepare patiently. She started organizing small concerts inside the community center, where children performed for their parents and neighbors. The atmosphere was always full of laughter, clapping, and joy. It became a tradition, something the whole town looked forward to. One day, a letter arrived from a foundation in the city. They wanted to support her music classes by donating a brand new piano. The community center gathered everyone to celebrate when it arrived. The shiny black piano stood proudly in the middle of the hall, its surface reflecting light like glass. She touched it gently, running her fingers across the smooth keys. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "but the old one will always be my favorite." The manager smiled. "We'll keep both. This one for performances, that one for memories." That night she played on the new piano for the first time. The entire town had gathered to listen. When she began, the melody flowed effortlessly, gentle, warm, and full of love. Halfway through, children joined in with small instruments, their laughter mixing with the sound. Parents clapped along, and even the people who once whispered against her were smiling. As the song ended, the applause was louder than ever. Tears glistened in her eyes as she looked around the hall filled with people. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore. She was playing for everyone. For the ones who believed, for the ones who doubted, for the ones still learning to listen. After the concert, people came to thank her. One of the women who had once laughed at her approached with a nervous smile. "I was wrong about you," she said quietly. "I didn't see who you really were." She placed a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. "It's all right," she said softly. "We all learn in our own time." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. Over time, her story spread beyond the town. Visitors came from nearby cities just to meet her and listen to her play. But no matter how many people came, she never changed her routine. Every morning she still came early, cleaned, made tea, and greeted everyone with a smile. One evening, after her last class ended, the janitor walked in holding an envelope. "Someone left this for you," he said. Inside was an invitation to perform at a national music festival. It was a big event, full of professional musicians, critics, and audiences from all over the country. She stared at it for a long time, unsure what to do. "Do you think I should go?" she asked. The janitor grinned. "You once played in this hall when people laughed at you. Now they'll listen from every corner of the country. You should go." She looked at the piano, her reflection shimmering on its surface. "If I go, I don't want to go for fame. I just want to play for the ones who believe they can't." "Then that's exactly why you should," he said. That night she practiced until her fingers ached. She didn't choose a famous song. Instead, she composed her own, a piece that told her story through sound. It began softly, like a lonely walk through silence, then grew stronger, full of hope and light. When the day of the festival came, she stood backstage surrounded by musicians in elegant clothes. Some looked curious when they saw her simple dress, but she didn't mind. She sat quietly, waiting for her turn, holding her charm bracelet as if it were a good luck charm. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage. The bright lights didn't scare her anymore. She sat at the piano, took a breath, and began to play. The first notes were soft, almost like a whisper. Then the music grew, filling the hall with warmth. The audience leaned forward, drawn in by the emotion that poured from each note. She didn't just play the piano, she spoke through it. The melody carried everything she had lived, the pain, the laughter, the forgiveness, and the peace. When the last note faded, there was silence again, the same kind that once filled her small town hall. Then the crowd rose to their feet, clapping endlessly. Some shouted her name. Others wiped their eyes. Backstage, reporters and musicians surrounded her, asking how she had learned to play so beautifully. She smiled and gave the same answer she always did. "It's not about how well you play, it's about what you feel when you do." That night, as she rode the train back home, she looked out the window at the dark sky and whispered, "Thank you, Mama." Her reflection in the glass smiled back at her. She knew she had finally done what her mother had always wanted, not just to play music, but to make people feel it. When she reached her town the next morning, the children were waiting at the station, holding handmade signs that said, "We're proud of you." She laughed, tears in her eyes as they ran to hug her. She realized then that the real stage wasn't in big cities or bright lights. It was right there among the people who loved her, in the little town where her journey began. The town had changed, though it still looked the same. The streets were familiar, the small shops still lined the corners, and the community center remained her favorite place to go every morning. But there was a warmth in the air now, a feeling that lingered wherever she went. People smiled with genuine care when they saw her. Children waved as she walked past. Even the elderly, who had once hardly noticed her, stopped to say a kind word. Her days began as they always had, Early mornings at the community center, sweeping the floors, wiping tables, and making sure the hall was ready for the children. But now every step she took carried a quiet confidence. She moved with a sense of purpose, not for herself, but for the music, for the children, and for the community that had embraced her. The piano had become the heart of the center. Children's laughter and the sound of keys filled every room. She still taught with patience and gentleness, guiding their fingers, encouraging their mistakes, and praising their efforts. She didn't care if they played perfectly. She cared that they played with their hearts. Parents began joining the lessons, curious and eager to learn from her. Some had once doubted her, while others had only just heard of her talent. Now they all wanted to be part of the experience. The community center became a place of learning, creativity, and joy. People came not just to play or listen to music, but to be part of a space where dreams were nurtured. One afternoon, a young boy stayed behind after class, carrying a worn notebook full of sheet music. "I wrote a song," he said shyly, "but I can't get it right." She smiled warmly. "Show me." He opened the notebook and began pointing to the notes. She helped him place his fingers on the keys and played along with him. Slowly, the song came alive, not perfect but full of emotion. The boy's eyes widened as he realized he had created something beautiful. He looked up at her and whispered, "I think I made music." "That's exactly what it is," she said gently. "Music is what you feel, not just what you play." Moments like these reminded her why she had continued. It wasn't fame or praise that mattered. It was these quiet, heartfelt moments, the kind that could change someone's day or even their life. As weeks turned into months, her story began reaching farther than she had ever imagined. People from other towns came to visit, bringing their children to learn from her. Occasionally, reporters came to interview her, curious about the woman who had once been mocked yet now inspired so many. But she never let the attention change her. She remained humble, kind, and soft-spoken. The women who had laughed at her years ago watched from the crowd at one of her concerts. They had approached her before the event, offering apologies. She had accepted them with grace, smiling and saying, "We all learn at our own pace." During the concert, she played a piece she had composed herself, a melody full of light, hope, and warmth. As her fingers moved across the keys, the audience sat in silence, captivated by the beauty and honesty of the music. When the final note faded, the hall erupted in applause, but she didn't look for attention. She simply bowed her head slightly, letting the music speak for her. After the concert, a young girl approached her holding a small envelope. "I wrote a song for you," she said. Inside was a simple handwritten piece of music, filled with notes and drawings. The girl smiled nervously. She knelt beside her and said softly, "This is beautiful. Thank you for sharing it with me." The girl's smile grew and she ran off to join her friends. That moment, quiet and small, stayed with her longer than the applause or the recognition ever could. It reminded her that inspiration could be simple, personal, and shared from one heart to another. One morning, as she was walking to the community center, she noticed a few children huddled around a notice board. Curious, she went closer and saw a flyer. It was a scholarship program for young musicians, and her students' names were on it. Some of the children had worked hard and shown such promise that they were being recognized for their efforts. She felt a swell of pride and joy, not for herself, but for the children. They had discovered something inside themselves, something she had only guided them to find. The joy in their eyes reminded her of her mother, and for a moment she whispered a quiet thank you to her. Life continued in its gentle rhythm. She still cleaned, still organized, and still taught, but now she also played occasionally for the town, small performances that brought people together. She never sought applause, but the warmth she received reminded her that she was making a difference. One evening, after a particularly lively class, the janitor approached her with a letter. It was from a foundation that wanted to support her work long-term. They offered to help her start a small music school in the town, one that could nurture future generations of musicians and dreamers.